Hey, everybody, welcome to this episode of Compassion and Courage Conversations in Healthcare. I'm your host, Marcus Engel, and this is the podcast where we talk about compassionate communication, provide perspective, and inspire resilience. And today we're going to touch on several of these topics with my guest, Dr. Toby Campbell. I'm sorry about screwing up your first name there, Dr. Campbell.
All good. Toby is an unusual name. Tony is much more common.
Well, I'm so glad to be able to talk to you and experience this time with you. And I'm excited to share about your work too. And I know that a little bit about your podcast, and I know a little bit about your work. And I would just like to dive right in. And I guess we should start off saying you're an MD, right?
I'm an MD, correct.
Okay.
I trained in both palliative care and medical oncology. So in the clinic, I take care of patients with lung cancer, and in the hospital, I'm seeing patients as a palliative care consultant.
Very good. And let's even just start with the definition, because I think a lot of people don't even understand what palliative care is. And this is something that I didn't know as of a few years ago. And so can you give us kind of an explanation of what palliative care looks like in the overall scheme of things?
Absolutely. So when you develop a medical condition, let's say that you have heart disease, sometimes you need a specialist, a cardiologist, to help manage your condition. Let's say it's really complicated high blood pressure. Well, just like a cardiologist helps people with complicated heart disease, palliative care specialists help people who are facing serious or life-threatening illness. We see people mostly in the hospital. Increasingly, we see people in the clinic. And in some communities, we might even have programs where we're seeing people in their homes. But a palliative care specialist would be one of the people that you would call when you've got something serious going on. We tend to help people cope with this serious illness and their new reality. We work hard to manage symptoms. We work hard to pull in your resources, your people, whether that's family or friends or others in your support network, to try to get everyone on the same page about the big picture, like what is going on, what are my options. Sometimes we help patients make complex, hard decisions, especially when they're facing really big decisions where, gosh, none of these are great outcomes and none of these are great decisions, but still we're in a position where we have to make a tough decision. So these are some of the kind of key things that a palliative care specialist would do for a patient or family facing a serious illness.
And so whenever a family member or a patient, I guess, comes to you, they've been referred probably by a cardiologist or a pulmonologist or oncologist, et cetera. Yes?
Yes, correct. We are seeing people at the invitation, usually of another doctor or another team. Sometimes a patient or family will ask for palliative care to be involved in their case, and we're always happy to be involved. We still, and the way the sort of medical system works in the United States, we still need the permission of your primary doctors to kind of get involved. But I think increasingly doctors are comfortable with palliative care being involved. And I'm seeing now more and more people asking, can palliative care be on my team? And that almost always goes well with the doctor saying, yeah, absolutely, let's get them involved.
And so what does that look like whenever you have that first meeting with a patient and maybe their family too?
The first meeting is a lot about what we call rapport building. It's about understanding the patient and their family's perspective on this particular illness. So that first visit, honestly, is a lot of questions. I teach, and when I'm training people to become palliative care doctors, I talk to them about talk time. I ask them to develop a clock that they hold in their mind. And we try to plan ahead of time, like during this particular visit, do you think that the doctor, should we talk more, or they talk more, and just to kind of maintain an awareness of this balance of talk. So on those first visits, I usually strive to have the patient and family talking, 70 or 80% of the time. Those visits are oftentimes about me listening, coming to understand both what they're dealing with, what their symptoms are, what they've tried so far, how they're handling this illness, kind of what's front of mind for them, or even back of mind for them. So I would say those early visits are also scary for people. They worry, I think, that I'm going to walk in and just sort of shake them and say, "Don't you know you're dying?" Which is not at all how it goes, Mark. I walk
Yeah,
in, I,
yeah.
I try to be kind and compassionate and listen, and understand where they are. And then we can figure out how I will be helpful. I usually tell people my aim is to be helpful to you. I don't know exactly how I'm going to be helpful yet, but I promise you by the end of our, hour together, I will have figured out a way to be helpful.
I love what you said about listening. My background in narrative medicine really, I feel like, can kind of be summed up in two words, which is active listening, and how much we can gain. But I love that idea of holding the clock in your head, that a patient could be talking 70 or 80% of the time during that first consultation, because they need time to vent out and verbally vomit. I would assume that might be a term that you might think of, what their fears and doubts and concerns and all the really scary stuff that goes along with some of these diagnoses.
I mean, you're absolutely right, Marcus. And Marcus, you and I also share this interest and passion in narrative medicine. You've done more formal study than I have, but well, that's not true. I started a narrative medicine workshop at the University of Wisconsin. That's still running today, about 10 years after it began. I work in partnership with a local writer and editor named Michelle Wilgen, and I've handed off that program to a mentee, Liana Escola, who's now running it even better than I ever did. But we, on actually a monthly basis, get together our writing group. And then on an annual basis, we have a public reading where every one of the participants from that year reads one of their essays. And I think that you said something that really resonated with me, which is I think that practice of um, listening and then developing that into a story and editing your story really helps you become a better listener. Because when I'm in a room listening to someone, knowing that I might write an essay about this later just really turns up my gain on the listening part. I'm listening for all those details that I think are going to create good story. And then that happens to me all the time, even when I'm not going to write an essay about this particular encounter. I've just trained that part of my brain to, I think, listen for detail. And I credit narrative medicine with that skill development.
I love that. I love that little tidbit, and I think that's going to be one that I share as well. To keep in mind this very notion of, I'm going to be writing about this later. What are the subtle aspects that I can bring up in an essay that will make a better story? I love that. And if I can ever help with that narrative work at UW, please feel free to reach out. I'd love to be involved. when we talk about um, when we talk about this narrative work and stories, obviously made up of language, and linguistics is a big focus of yours in your palliative care work. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Sure. I think that the way we communicate really matters. Um, of course, people are aware that words matter. And I think words do matter. Especially, there are some blocking words that one might use that might really impair your ability to form a relationship with someone. For example, a slur of some kind, if you were to use a slur. Um, so there are some obvious examples of words that can be blocking. But I think it's less understood and less appreciated how much the pace in which one speaks matters, and how much that changes the way that we perceive what someone is saying, how volume matters, how the sequence of words, where we place things in conversation, I find is a really important factor in terms of whether someone receives what I'm saying and receives it well. We've all heard stories of, well, the doctor walked in, said I'm dying, and then, I don't remember any of the rest of it. So it might be true that I need to communicate to someone that they're dying. I had to tell someone that this morning. Um, but how I do that, and more importantly, where I position that information in my consultation matters more actually than the specific words that I use. So when I think about linguistics, I'm thinking about some of the time I'm thinking about the words, but right now what I'm really working on is sequencing and pace and volume. Some of those kind of what you might even think of as like nonverbals. I mean, they're verbal, but they're less about the words. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And my bachelor's is in sociology, so I'm thinking about this as a cross cultural type affair too, and how those things that could be a potential block to care as well, because just culturally we communicate differently.
I agree. And encourage people not to generalize, right? Let's say you're meeting someone who has a particular religious background, they're Baptist. I don't want to leap to any assumptions that this Baptist behaves like other Baptists that I've met in the past. We want to engage people where they're at and ask them questions and keep gathering information until we understand this individual's perspective on illness and on life. And that then applies across culture too. We can meet with people who are, from Madison, Wisconsin, but I can also meet someone who's an immigrant from Iran. And I just need to probably spend more time understanding the Iranian perspective before I make comments about healthcare, because that's less familiar to me. But to be honest, someone from Madison, Wisconsin might have a very unfamiliar background and perspective to mine, and I need to spend time understanding theirs. So when one spends time understanding people and where they're coming from and how they think about things, then you can cross all kinds of boundaries. You can cross political boundaries, racial boundaries, ethnic boundaries. But I think it comes back to your intent. My intent in that space is to understand my patient and where they're coming from. And I think people can sense that, oh, this is a doctor who really wants to get me, really wants to understand me.
Mhm.
And that also helps you cross boundaries and communicate across difference.
And as I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking, well, it all starts with active listening, but it even starts before the active listening. It starts with the openness to learn, right? And I think in a
Absolutely.
scientific field, we're all open to learn. But across society, that's not necessarily the case, right? We can't say that in every situation. So this openness to learn and to listen um, really guides the care that's given. I want to go back to what you said earlier about the pace and placement of bad news in a conversation. Can you parse that out a little bit more for me? Because that I find that very interesting.
Sure. I think about hard conversations as if they had structure. So let's picture a hard conversation like a house. Let's call it a conversation house. There are different conversations that we have to have. I have to have conversations pretty frequently where I break bad news. So breaking bad news is a kind of a conversation house for me. An example of a different kind of a house would be a complex decision making conversation. That's still has structure. It's a different structure. It's a different house. But I think of these as houses. So that then allows me to picture myself approaching someone's house. Let's say that I'm meeting with a patient. Let's say that their name is Patty. So I'm approaching Patty's house. I know that what I need to tell Patty is that she has a new diagnosis of an advanced cancer that's terrible. Patty doesn't know that yet. So when I approach this house, I picture myself on the porch, right? I need to get into Patty's house. I need to get deep into her house, into one of those kind of cherished like family rooms with plush seats, and it's a comfortable space. It's a safe space. It's a space that she loves to go to, that she feels safe. I need to get into that deep space, or this news is I'm just gonna shout it at the walls and I'm not even gonna, reach her. So I picture myself on the porch. I'm going to open this conversation. How am I going to open it? I'm going to be nice. I'm going to be funny. I'm going to be serious. I need to think about the way in which I want to knock on the door and ask permission to come into Patty's house. And then I'm going to navigate this. So one of the things one of the early rooms for me is a room that we call gaining someone's perception. That is their understanding. So I picture myself in a room, and there's pictures on the wall, and there's stuff in the room. And so I'm asking Patty, questions like, what have you heard from the doctors about what's going on? I might also ask questions about her life. Oh, I see there's a piano in the corner. Do you play piano? Or I see a picture of your family on the wall. Again, these are imagined, right, Marcus? What I'm saying to her is, tell me about who's important to you. Who are the people in your life that you care about and care about you. So I stay in that room where I'm gathering these kinds of information. And then there will be a point where I think I have enough information and I'm ready to move into that inner cherished space to talk about this bad news. I'm going to ask Patty permission, right? I'm going to say, Patty, is it okay if we go into the room where we're going to talk about what's going on with your healthcare? Let's say Patty says yes. I might ask a second question. When we're in there, are you the sort of person who would want me to be pretty straightforward? Do you want to know what's going on and you just want me to be straight about it? And then I'll gauge Patty's response, right? She might say, yes, please. Or she might say, something different. And I would take that information and gauge it. So, Marcus, it really helps me to think about these conversations as having structure. Then I would add that, Patty might want me to move through the conversation in a certain way, but someone else might be different, right? Someone else, I might knock on the door and they say, oh, thank God you're here. Come back to this room. I really need to know what's going on, and we might just walk right into the room because they've asked me to, and we go straight to the news. So by understanding that conversations have structure, I can have a better sense of where I am in the conversation. And that allows me to, frankly, be more skilled at it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I love that. That's a really powerful image of the house and moving through the house. So let's move out of the realms of the theoretical, and I'll ask you the question that I ask every guest, which is to share an experience about a time that you were there for someone or that someone was there for you. And this obviously can go into professional, personal, however you choose to think of an instance of presence.
I think I'll stay in my professional realm. I think as palliative care clinicians, we try to be present every day. Mm-hmm. I think of presence, and I think of what we do as sort of compassion, but also empathy. And I think of myself as having a vessel. I try to put on my white coat. I don't actually wear a white coat, but if I would put on my white coat, my doctor mode, if you will, and meet people where they are. And when I'm meeting people, that oftentimes means they're having a really bad day, maybe the worst day of their life. And so for me, Marcus, in my life, in effect, everyone I'm meeting is having a really bad day. And they need me to be present. I sort of picture it like we're at their house still, but now we're in the backyard and they have a swimming pool. And the swimming pool is maybe it's full of water, but maybe it's full of mud, whatever is going on with them. And I try to picture myself as jumping into the pool with them. I'm not trying to put up a wall. I'm not trying to separate myself from anything. I'm trying to be as present and as in the pool as I can be. And we're going to deal with whatever is in there. But I'm going to end my visit at some point, right? Maybe it's 30 minutes, maybe it's 2 hours, whatever it is, but it's going to come to an end. And so I'm always aware that I'm in their house and in their pool, that it's not my house and it's not my pool. And I picture myself toweling off and leaving the sadness or anger or happiness or whatever we've just been dealing with, leaving that there because it's theirs. And that then enables me to, literally step out of the room, write my note, and then honestly go on to the next consult and do it all over again at a different person's house with a different set of circumstances. But I have to be able to do that, 5 to 10 times every day. And then I have to go home and play with my kids.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. How do you stay present when you are delivering terrible news to people on the hourly basis?
I mean, this visual helps me to do that. I will say I've gotten better at it as I've gotten older. I'm solidly mid career at this point. You know, towards the end of mid career. Maybe I'm I don't know when you decide. I don't know when you're entering late career, but I'm a professor. I've been at this 25 years. I'm in my 50s. I have gotten better at it. I would say earlier in my career, I used to run out of energy, I guess, or run out of empathy. I don't know. My vessel was full. I couldn't hold anymore. And I just knew that I couldn't go deep. I just knew like the next room that I go into, I can't go deep because I'm out of gas here. I have a far deeper reservoir than I used to. Yesterday, just as an example, I saw 20 people. So that's 20 hard conversations. And I was really tired at the end of the day, but I got through the whole day, and everybody got kind of me, you know, nobody got shorted energy. I had enough energy to get through the day. I went to bed pretty quickly after getting home, but I was able to get through the whole day. So that's how I do it. I just kind of towel off and go to the next room, you know?
Toweling off. I'll remember that visual. I will remember that visual. So thank you for putting that in my mind. Um, when you're are there other techniques that you use besides the toweling off example?
Well, I think one powerful one is narrative medicine, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I do write pretty regularly.
Okay.
I write about stories that are sticky, and then I also draw. So I have a habit of drawing a picture of a consult. I'm picturing the one that I just drew the most recently. I met someone who was a young person who had a new cancer diagnosis that was bad, and their parents were there in the room, and I drew this picture of kind of a tornado, and this person was in there, and her mom was in there, and there was a stop sign because there were some barriers that I ran into that were clear. It was clear to me I wouldn't be able to get past them, so I just left the stop sign up. So anyway, I draw a picture afterwards of this wind, like, you know, just like I'm not a good drawer, so just like a doodle, if you will. There's a young girl in a wheelchair, there's a mom, there's a tornado, there's a stop sign, but it kind of helps me make sense of what just happened. And I develop a deeper understanding both by writing and by drawing pictures of the conversations afterwards. Sometimes my pictures are more abstract. I have one in my other office where we had done a consult with a patient that had liver failure, and they it had just been decided that they were not going to get a liver transplant, and that meant they were going to die. And my job was to go and tell them that information. And I drew a picture after. I had a medical student with me, and I drew a picture of the consult afterwards, and it was just a U shape. It was like I was like, let's draw the emotional energy. You know, we came in, it was okay. We were in this really dark place for most of the consult, but then it lifted at the end, and we found ways to kind of be optimistic and even hopeful at the end of the consult, even though the person was going to die that day. Um, and the medical student was quite a talented artist and made not a portrait, made a painting of this, all the emotion and of that consult. And then she had it at a or like the med school had a gallery, and I actually bought the painting, and then I have it hanging in my office. So that's just a couple of examples of other ways, I guess, that I try to make sense of what it is that I do
Mm.
and cope with it.
I don't know a lot about the training that goes into palliative care, but I assume that there is a good portion of it that is counseling, or at least something akin to counseling, and um, and helping guide those patients emotionally and mentally too through this. Uh, so I would, listening to knowing doctors as I do around the country, it's so good to hear you solidly based in your own humanity as well.
I think that's important for us. I want to be careful because we are not psychologists, and um, we're not really counselors. What we are is maybe we are able to counsel people in a narrow way, right, about serious illness and about preparing for dying, um, and about coping with serious illness, not about coping in general, not about dealing with other mental health problems. So I just want to be
Mhm, mhm.
recognize true expertise that psychologists and psychiatrists bring, and I don't want to co-opt their expertise. So I think it's
Sure.
fair to say that we are good at counseling in this kind of narrow band around serious illness.
Yeah, yeah, I like it. And listening. I mean, you don't have to be trained in counseling to listen, right? We can
Amen.
all do that. Yeah. So I guess in the time we have left, just one or two questions for you, kind of random questions. But let's say that you've amassed a great amount of wealth in your life, and you must, upon your death, give it to a philanthropy. Is there a philanthropy that you really love or that's close to your heart that you would want to gift your your earnings to?
What a fascinating question, Marcus. I mean, it causes me to think about, okay, Toby, what are your true passions and your true
Mm.
priorities, right? Because initially I was thinking, oh, well, sure, something work related like cancer or palliative care. But Marcus, the truth is, if I actually had amassed a great deal of wealth and was going to give it away, honestly, like I would say the biggest uh, difference maker in my life, my family's life, would be around the arts and around music in particular. Music is something that's very important in my family, and my kids are musicians and study music, and there have been generous donors in our Madison community who have created artistic spaces that my children have benefited from. And so my donations actually would go towards the arts, and in particular um, youth arts, right? I mean, music is a
Mhm.
passion, but I wouldn't be so specific. I think that the donation would be around needs so that children could have that kind of opportunity to learn and to express themselves through the arts.
I love it. Are you a musician yourself?
In no way like my children, who are actually quite talented. I can sing a little bit. I can play a few
Mhm.
instruments, but like low to medium quality, to be honest.
Gotcha, gotcha, gotcha. I've music was a huge part of my healing journey, and so I always connect with people over music. So do you have a favorite concert or a most memorable concert that you've ever attended?
Okay, um, so many, but I'm gonna go with the one of the recent concerts. Wow, I've been to two recent concerts that were exceptional. I'm gonna pick John Batiste. We John Batiste played in Madison, Wisconsin, maybe 2 months ago, and it was an extraordinarily moving concert. People were up and dancing and clapping and singing, and he moved through the audience. He had that entire theater feeling of one mind and being kind of present with him. We're moving, creating something together. I have never
Mhm.
seen someone as masterfully move a crowd in the way that he did. It was an exceptional experience.
Hmm. What was the other concert?
The other one that I was thinking of, um, this is terrible, Marcus. His name has left my mind. It's going to come in a second. It's a Christmas concert, and the artist was famous for being in Hamilton. He played
Hmm.
Aaron Burr, um, and I'm a terrible person that his name left my mind, but it was an
Quite all
extraordinary
right.
Christmas concert as well.
Great, great. And so, for my last question, the one that I love to ask people is if you had the largest billboard on top of the world's tallest mountain, what is the message that you would want to broadcast to humanity?
Well, I'm going to come back actually to a core value of mine that we referenced earlier. And I think that my billboard would just say, be curious.
Mm, be
Because I think
curious.
curiosity means that we listen. Curiosity means that we don't judge, that we try to understand, and that leads to mutual understanding. So I think my billboard would say, be curious.
And I said that was the last question, but I really want to go back to something that we said before we started the interview, which is your podcast, Extraordinary Conversations. Tell me a little bit about that and what listeners can find there.
Yeah, I would love to talk about extraordinary conversations. So, in medicine, there are many conversations that are truly extraordinary, right? They are not normal conversations. And one of them is when someone goes to meet with a family in crisis on the worst day of their life, to ask them if they think their brother or son or father would be interested in donating their organs. What would they say, or what would they tell us about that if that were an opportunity? And so my curiosity about that started with having seen these conversations and having worked with individuals who conduct those conversations. And that led us to recording around 50 interviews with people from all across the spectrum of organ donation and transplantation. Effectively, what we did in this audio documentary is follow organs from those people who asked the question, do you think your loved one would want to donate, to donor families, to the individuals who go and do perform that recovery surgery, to the transplant process and program, and then to recipients, people who received hearts and lungs and livers and kidneys. And so we were able to, I think, peer into this largely black box for most people. You know, how does donation and transplantation work? And we talked to the people who live that life and who experienced transplant themselves and donation themselves. And so I am really proud of the story that we told. It is at times sweet and uplifting. It is at times sad and you know, we deal with loss, right? People who lost someone who was an organ donor. But also we deal with legacy and the redemption that can come from that too. So it is a moving testament to, I think, the power of humans connecting and helping one another. And um, yeah, it was a project that I had no idea what I was getting into. It took me actually about 4 years to finish it because I have a day job, and I'm so proud of what we made though. I made it together with my
Excellent.
close colleague Michelle Wilgen, the writer, as well as our key I don't even know what to call her. She did a little bit of everything. Dr. Bunyan Kuda, and then help from a number of other people along the way.
I'm really looking forward to hearing that. I'm obviously a very big advocate of organ donation, and so thank you for promoting and boosting this idea for everybody to be thinking about, and hopefully thinking about it now while we're all walking upright instead of having our families need to make those decisions later on during a tragedy.
That's the one thing that I would want to leave people with, Marcus, is the one thing that I really learned from this project is how helpful it is to have at least told your people, right? Whoever it is that would speak for you, if you were ever in a situation where you couldn't speak for yourself, how you feel about things like organ donation. Those families that have heard, like, because they've had a conversation, they are just emotionally and psychologically in a very different place than those that are having to make that tough decision on your behalf without really having any knowledge. The experts who walk those families through those decisions are really good at helping them kind of capture values and think it through. But my impression is that those families that had at least some conversation about it were in a much better space. Whichever way you feel, I'm no judgment, right? You can say I'm no way, no organ donation. You can say yes, I like it. I don't. Doesn't matter to me. But I tell you, your families matter, and having that information will really help them if they ever are in that spot.
And what a beautiful legacy to live, right? That even though I may have died, that there are parts of me that can still help someone else, and that's just such a beautiful gift.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Toby Campbell, thank you so much for being with me today. Thank you for the work that you do and the insights you have shared. And other than extraordinary conversations, is there anywhere else we can send to learn more about you or the work that you're doing?
Sure. I have a separate interview style podcast like you do, Marcus. It's called Palliatively Speaking. And I that palliatively-speaking.com is our website, and I interview experts in palliative care from across the spectrum: nurses and social workers, doctors and nurse practitioners, and other experts. So another project of mine that's aimed at kind of the public. So if you're interested in learning more about palliative care and the people that work in palliative care, you could check out Palliatively Speaking.
That these are two great resources. So thank you so much for them. And listeners, thank you so much for being with us for this episode of Compassion and Courage, Conversations in Healthcare. I'm your host, Marcus Engel, and please visit marcusengel.com for keynote speaking needs, consulting for hospitals and healthcare centers, and for books and products. Thank you all so much, and we will see you on the next episode of Compassion and Courage.